So you've heard some strong words from politicians on this, but what can Canada really do? Ian, let's get a reality. You feel this could mark the beginning of the end for Canada's auto manufacturing industry. Why?
What if a single trade decision in Washington quietly set the countdown clock on Canada's auto industry, an industry that has survived for more than half a century and most people did not even realize it was happening? In recent days, the debate around Canada's auto sector has sounded political, emotional, and at times even dismissive. But beneath the noise lies a far more troubling reality. This is not simply a disagreement between politicians. This is a cold economic calculation unfolding inside a global trade war driven by tariffs, scale, and market access. And once that calculation turns negative, it does not reverse easily. Canada builds vehicles in Ontario that look Canadian on the surface, but economically, they exist for one purpose: to be sold into the United States. For decades, that model worked. It worked because borders were open, supply chains were integrated, and tariffs stayed low. Today, that foundation is cracking. With the United States hardening its trade stance and tariffs becoming a long-term policy tool rather than a negotiating threat, the question is no longer whether Canada's auto sector is under pressure. The real question is whether the system that kept it alive can still function at all. And before you assume this is just another warning that will pass, stay with this analysis until the end, because the final conclusion may be far more unsettling than most Canadians and Americans are prepared to accept. What is unfolding now goes beyond political rhetoric and enters the territory of irreversible economics. In the current trade war, tariffs are not designed to pressure negotiations. They are designed to change behavior permanently. When the United States raises tariffs on vehicles built in Canada, the objective is simple: make those vehicles mathematically unprofitable before they ever reach an American dealership. This creates a silent chain reaction. Automakers do not wait for factories to fail. They act early. Capital flows stop. New investments are frozen. Maintenance budgets shrink. Product lines are quietly reassigned to plants south of the border. None of this makes headlines at first, but it is how industrial exits begin. Canada's auto plants were built to serve the United States market, not a domestic one. Once tariffs disrupt that access, the business case collapses with brutal speed. And here is the uncomfortable truth: this process has already started. But the most damaging consequences are not happening on factory floors yet. They are unfolding inside boardrooms, where decisions made today will not become visible until it is already too late, and the final outcome may shock both countries. The first visible damage of a prolonged tariff regime does not arrive as a sudden collapse. It arrives quietly, through hiring freezes, early retirements, and contract work that is never renewed. Canada's auto sector supports hundreds of thousands of jobs when assembly plants, parts suppliers, logistics firms, and local service economies are counted together. These are not low-wage positions. They are among the highest paid manufacturing jobs in the country, supporting mortgages, pensions, and entire regional tax bases. When tariffs undermine export economics, manufacturers do not immediately announce closures. Instead, they slow production. Overtime disappears, temporary workers are released. Suppliers are told to reduce output. Within months, local economies begin to feel stress, even though no official shutdown has occurred. Retail spending weakens. Municipal revenues decline. Housing demand softens. These early warning signs are often misread as cyclical weakness rather than structural retreat. What makes this moment different is that there is no alternative market waiting to absorb displaced production. Canada's domestic vehicle market is simply too small to replace lost access to the United States. This means every lost export order translates directly into lost income at home. Employment insurance claims rise. Provincial governments face increased pressure on social services. The political debate intensifies, but the economic trajectory continues unchanged. And this is only the first layer of impact. The deeper shock arrives when skilled labor leaves the sector permanently, taking decades of experience with them and eroding any chance of future recovery. As production weakens, consumers face a parallel consequence. Vehicles assembled in Canada become more expensive, not only because of tariffs, but because reduced scale raises per unit costs. Fewer models are offered, waiting times increase, financing becomes less favorable as lenders reassess risk in a shrinking industry. For households already facing higher living costs, transportation becomes another financial burden. Communities built around auto manufacturing feel a sharper pain. Towns near assembly plants rely on stable industrial employment to sustain schools, healthcare facilities, and infrastructure investment. When confidence in the industry fades, so does long-term planning. Businesses delay expansion. Young workers relocate. Population growth stalls. The decline becomes self-reinforcing. Government finances are also strained. Auto manufacturing contributes significantly to tax revenues at both federal and provincial levels. As output falls, governments face a dilemma. Increase subsidies to slow the decline, or accept job losses and fund social support instead. Neither option is politically comfortable, and both carry long-term costs. What often goes unspoken is that tariffs do not only reshape trade flows, they reshape social stability. A prolonged trade war transfers economic risk from corporations to workers and communities. Decisions made in Washington ripple outward, changing household budgets in Ontario and altering the economic map of entire regions. Yet the most consequential impact has not appeared in employment figures or consumer prices. It is emerging in strategic planning documents and long-term forecasts that rarely reach public view. What those documents reveal may redefine how both countries understand this trade war. The next phase of this story exposes what the United States truly gains, what Canada truly risks, and why the outcome may not favor either side in the way policymakers expect. From Washington's perspective, tariffs are framed as a corrective tool. The logic is straightforward. By raising the cost of vehicles built outside the United States, production is incentivized to move back inside national borders. In theory, this strengthens domestic manufacturing, protects American workers, and reduces reliance on foreign supply chains. In the context of a trade war, this approach plays well politically and appears decisive. However, the economic reality is more complex. The United States auto industry has been deeply integrated with Canada for decades. Engines, transmissions, electronics, and body components routinely cross the border multiple times before a single vehicle is completed. When tariffs disrupt that flow, American manufacturers also absorb higher costs. Those costs do not disappear. They are passed along to consumers through higher vehicle prices, reduced model availability, and tighter financing conditions. Internationally, allies are watching closely. Canada is not a distant competitor. It is one of the closest economic partners of the United States. When tariffs are imposed on Canadian production, it sends a signal that even trusted partners are not exempt in this trade war. That message reverberates through Europe and Asia, where governments are accelerating their own industrial protection strategies. Instead of cooperation, the global system moves further toward fragmentation. For Canada, this moment exposes a strategic vulnerability. Dependence on a single export market leaves little room to maneuver. Diversifying trade sounds appealing, but building new auto export relationships at scale is neither quick nor guaranteed. Meanwhile, global competitors are securing their own domestic industries with subsidies, market access restrictions, and state-backed investment. What makes this situation particularly risky is that both sides may believe they are winning. The United States may see short-term investment announcements. Canada may believe it can adapt through incentives or policy adjustments. But trade wars rarely produce clean victories. They produce slow shifts that only become visible once supply chains have already moved and capital has already committed elsewhere. And this leads to the most uncomfortable question of all. If tariffs remain and global protectionism deepens, is the real outcome not a strengthened North American auto industry, but a permanently smaller one on both sides of the border? The answer to that question is hidden in the long-term strategic choices now being considered behind closed doors, and the final phase of this analysis reveals why the next move could permanently reshape Canada's economic future. As the trade war hardens into a long-term reality, Canada faces a strategic crossroads that cannot be delayed or softened by political language. Continuing to support auto manufacturing through subsidies may slow the pace of decline, but it does not change the underlying arithmetic. Modern auto plants require massive capital investment, enormous production volumes, and guaranteed access to large consumer markets. Without those conditions, even generous government support only postpones difficult decisions. The risk of maintaining the status quo is subtle but severe. Every dollar directed toward preserving uneconomic production is a dollar not invested in sectors where Canada holds a clear comparative advantage. Resources, energy, agriculture, critical minerals, and advanced materials offer scale, global demand, and long-term revenue potential. These sectors align with what international investors are already seeking, especially as supply chains fragment under tariffs and geopolitical risk. There is also a workforce risk. Protecting declining industries can trap skilled labor in shrinking sectors, limiting retraining and mobility. Over time, this reduces national productivity and leaves younger workers with fewer opportunities. Countries that delay restructuring often experience deeper economic pain later, as adjustment becomes unavoidable but more disruptive. At the same time, abandoning auto manufacturing carries its own political and social costs. Communities built around factories cannot be transformed overnight. Transition requires planning, infrastructure, investment, and education systems aligned with future demand. Without a coordinated strategy, the pivot risks becoming chaotic rather than deliberate. What makes this moment decisive is timing. The longer uncertainty persists, the more investment decisions are made elsewhere. Capital, once redirected, rarely returns. In a prolonged trade war, hesitation itself becomes a strategic mistake. The final question, then, is not whether Canada can save every auto plant. It is whether Canada can design an economic transition before market forces impose one without warning. The answer to that question determines whether the coming years are defined by managed change or by sudden industrial shock. And the conclusion of this analysis exposes why this choice does not only affect Canada, but could alter the balance of North American trade in ways few policymakers are prepared to confront. The most dangerous assumption in this trade war is the belief that industrial decline happens only when factories close. In reality, the decisive moment comes much earlier, when long-term capital quietly changes direction. That shift is now underway, and its implications extend far beyond auto manufacturing. Global automakers do not plan in election cycles. They plan in decades. When tariffs become embedded policy rather than a temporary tactic, investment models are rewritten. New plants are not expanded. Research budgets are relocated. Electric vehicle platforms are assigned to regions with stable market access. Once those decisions are made, reversing them becomes nearly impossible, regardless of future political changes. For Canada, this creates a strategic paradox. The country may continue assembling vehicles for years, giving the appearance of stability, while its role in the future auto industry steadily erodes. Advanced manufacturing is increasingly tied to software, battery technology, and autonomous systems. These are capital-intensive, research-driven segments that follow scale and certainty. In a prolonged trade war, Canada risks being locked into legacy production while innovation migrates elsewhere. The United States, meanwhile, faces its own hidden exposure. Tariffs may encourage some reshoring, but they also reduce competitive pressure. Protected markets often become less efficient over time, leading to higher costs and slower innovation. American consumers ultimately pay the price through higher vehicle prices and fewer choices. What appears to be a victory for domestic manufacturing can quietly weaken global competitiveness. There is also a broader geopolitical dimension. As the United States and Canada redefine their economic relationship under tariffs, other powers are adapting rapidly. Europe is consolidating its industrial base. Asia is scaling production at unmatched speed. In a fragmented trade environment, regional blocs strengthen internally while cross-border partnerships weaken. North America risks falling behind if integration gives way to prolonged friction. The true twist in this story is that the trade war may not produce a clear winner at all. Instead, it may shrink the entire North American auto ecosystem, leaving both countries with fewer high-value manufacturing jobs and reduced global influence in one of the world's most strategic industries. Once that influence is lost, reclaiming it requires far more than policy reversals. And here is the most unsettling possibility. If Canada ultimately pivots away from auto manufacturing toward resources and energy, and the United States focuses inward under tariff protection, the integrated North American model that dominated for half a century may quietly dissolve. What replaces it could be a looser, less efficient system that benefits neither side as much as the one it replaces. The final conclusion forces an uncomfortable reckoning. This trade war is not only about tariffs or factories. It is about whether North America chooses cooperation as a competitive advantage or isolation as a long-term risk. The answer to that question will define economic outcomes long after today's headlines fade. When the history of this trade war is written, it may not focus on speeches, press conferences, or even tariff announcements. It will focus on what quietly changed beneath the surface. Capital moved. Supply chains reoriented. Long-standing assumptions about North American integration were rewritten without public debate. Canada's auto sector did not arrive at this moment because of a single policy decision. It arrived here because an industry built on open access to the United States now faces a future defined by tariffs, protection, and strategic uncertainty. In a global economy shaped by scale and consolidation, hesitation carries consequences as real as action. For the United States, tariffs promise control and leverage. But they also introduce higher costs, reduced competition, and long-term risks to innovation. For Canada, the challenge is existential. Adapt too slowly, and the market will decide the outcome. Move decisively, and the country may yet redirect its strengths towards sectors where it can compete globally. This is not a question of winners and losers in the short term. It is a question of economic direction. Will North America emerge from this trade war more resilient or more fragmented than before? And that leaves one final question for policymakers, workers, and consumers on both sides of the border. Is this a bold strategy or a costly miscalculation that reshapes the future of the United States and Canada in ways no one fully intended?